Okay, Year 11, this is paper 3, your last paper, nearly there. The design argument. The design argument was put together by Paley, and Paley uses the design argument to prove that God really exists. And he says, look at a watch. A watch is complex, so you know someone designed it. It's not random, wasn't just thrown together. He says, right, now look at the world. The world is even more complex than a watch. And it's beautiful, and it has an order, all the seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter, and it has a purpose. The purpose is to sustain life like us in the world. And he's saying, look, all that is too complex, too beautiful, too ordered for a human to have put together. There must have been someone greater, and that someone greater must be God. That proves that God exists. When we look at the world, we see the complexity of it, and that proves God exists. But atheists and humanists, people who don't believe in God, will say, no, that doesn't work. The world is not perfect. Look at the natural disasters like earthquakes. It could not have been designed. Therefore, there couldn't be a God. Because if you're saying God designed it, it should be perfect. But as it's not perfect, obviously the world wasn't designed by a greater being, by God. So, how are Catholics going to respond? They're going to say maybe God didn't design the world perfectly because he wants to test us a little bit, build up our character. If we lived in a perfect world, we'd become lazy, we'd become ungrateful, we'd be spoilt. And so by having an imperfect world, it helps us to think, how do we solve these problems? How do we make the world a better place for people who are struggling with natural disasters? It builds character. It helps us to become more compassionate. Secondly, they will say science created the earth, not God. We don't need God. How are Christians going to respond to these arguments? They're going to say, well, actually, all right, you're telling us that science created the world. Who created science? Who created the laws of nature? God was behind science and nature. He's given us all those laws. Everything that works out and balances with regard to science and all the fine-tuning, all that was given by God. They could argue the Big Bang, that was caused by God. They could say, well, look, science tells us how the world came to be, but it doesn't tell us why. Only our belief in God tells us why the world came into being. Now, GCSE questions that could come up. You could have a question saying, explain 2 ways that the design argument proves the existence of God for Catholics. You could say one way it proves it is that the world is complex, too complex for a human to have created. Therefore, it must have been a superpower, must have been God, even more super than Superman. Second way that the design argument proves the existence of God is that the world is too beautiful. It's too beautiful for a human to have created or mere mortal to have designed. It must have been God, okay? God designed the world beautiful. God designed it complex. It's too complex for a human to have designed it. Therefore, it proves God exists, someone greater than us, okay? Remember, Paley says that a watch can be designed by a human, but the world is too complex for a human to have designed it. Therefore, that only leaves one answer, must be God. Another question could be, explain 2 ways Catholics respond to arguments against the design arguments. Arguments against the design argument is 1, science created the earth, not God. 2, the world is imperfect. It hasn't been designed perfectly. Now for this, your arguments against that is going to be, well, God created science, God created the laws of nature, so those arguments against the design argument don't stand up. And you could also say, with regard to arguments against the design argument, that actually maybe God didn't create the world perfectly because he wants to test us and develop our character. So that's the argument against arguments against the design argument, if I've not lost you, okay? Question in 2021 outlined 3 features of the design argument. 1, the world is complex. 2, the world is beautiful. 3, the world has an order. Now, just go and do your best and floor the examiners.